Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's cybersecurity training. We try and hold one of these annually because it's such a vital topic in keeping both our users and data safe. This webinar will be about 15-20 minutes long. I'll try not to talk too much about and go too much into depth about them. It is a very high-level webinar about, first and foremost, what cybersecurity is and how we can make those decisions, and from a technical and user point of view, to ensure that we remain safe. As I say, it is a webinar, so webcams and mics have been disabled, but there is a section at the end for questions. So if any of you have got any questions throughout the presentation, please just go into the conversation section and type them in there, and we'll go through them at the end. You can find that with the speech bubble towards the top right of your screen. If you hover over it, it'll say show conversation. So just moving on to the actual content of what we'll talk about today. So we'll briefly look at what is cybersecurity. We'll also look at who and why. So who are behind the attacks that we face, and we do face them daily, and also why are they attacking us? Why are they attacking our organisation users, and why are they after our data? I'll also give a recent example. I won't name the Multi Academy Trust, but there was a very high profile one that has recently had a hack, basically, and it's taken down their whole network, and that happened recently, as I think it was last July. And then we'll look at some data security practices and what those entail, and then a bit of content around secure passwords, and we will continue to try and educate and train people on what secure passwords are and sort of the best practices around those as well. They do change now and again, so it is important that you try and keep up with the latest information on that. And then to finish, it's that one of our biggest threats is around phishing emails, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are and how to tell a phishing email against a legitimate one, and what safety measures we've got in place for that. So just moving on to the first area, and what is cybersecurity. So in its simplest term, it's about keeping our organisation's data and users digitally safe. We face quite a lot of attacks that users don't see, that we have firewalls, etc., in place that are designed to stop these, and it's a constantly evolving attack. The sector is massive, so any products that the IT companies or suppliers produce, 1 year, the next year they all need updating because how hackers attack has changed. So from a technical point of view, it's pretty much a cat and mouse chase around all the time. I think one of the biggest protections against being hacked and being cyber secure is yourself, the users. We all have our part to play, just like we do in safeguarding children. We all have our part to play in safeguarding our data and users as well. So it's really important that you try and take the guidance on board and follow those best practices. And again, and this is one of the parts that's ever evolving, and the types of attacks that we face. Now, I won't go into all of these, but some of the biggest ones are phishing that we will go into, and that's about sending emails, trying to get you to put your username and password in there and stealing those details. And then there's another one that's a fairly new one, but we're seeing quite a lot more of these sorts of attacks, is one called vishing. It's the same as phishing, but you effectively get a phone call, and that person on the other end of the phone call is trying to obtain some of your details. And then we have brute force attacks, which effectively is they use software to try lots of different combinations of username and passwords trying to get into your accounts. Now, those attacks, we don't see so many of those anymore because we have protections in place, and generally speaking in IT, there's protections in place now where if a user tries to enter the incorrect password 10 times, it will lock their account, and it just means that protection's there. Looking at the sort of who will attack us, again, some of these we won't see in our organisation in the education sector, but online criminals, so they're the general hackers out there that, for instance, will just canvass the whole area to try and see what they can find, any sort of weaknesses, and then try to exploit them. Those are sort of the general ones that we see. The next one is foreign governments. Again, in our setting, we don't see this very often, but you will have probably seen in the news at some point how China or Russia, for instance, have been trying to hack into organisations, etc. So they're sort of the two big plays in there, although that's just what we hear in the news. I would imagine that all nations are doing the same thing as well. Political activists, so their main targets are, for instance, if they're anti-animal testing, they might try to hack into L'Oreal's website, for instance, to try and disrupt that organisation. Terrorist organisations through the prevent and spreading of propaganda. So the prevent agenda, all of that is to protect around those sort of areas. Malicious insiders. I've worked at Discovery for about 8 years and I've never come across one of these, but if, for instance, you have a staff member working in one of your schools or the central team and they have a purpose of trying to gain access to data or user accounts that they're not meant to have, as I say, we rarely, and in my role here, I've never seen or come across any of those at the moment. And internal mistakes, which is probably one of our biggest ones. We're all human, we all make mistakes, myself, everybody, all the technical team, even though they have a wider knowledge of around these areas, at the end of the day, we're still human and we still make mistakes. I think a part of that area is learning from those mistakes and then building a better security barrier against hackers or those mistakes. But it's things like if you send sensitive information in via email and you send it to the wrong person. I know we've had a few instances of those around the organisation, but that's what's classed as a internal mistake. And the National Security Centre, which is our which is a branch of GCHQ, which is our cybersecurity organisation for the country, they do class that as a cyber attack. So internal mistakes have now been classified as that. And then just looking at the why would anyone target yourself as users or the data in the organisation or data in your school? So there are a couple of areas on here. So indiscriminate attacks, these are effectively general hackers who are just looking for vulnerabilities. They will try to if we take phishing, for example, they'll try and mass email everybody with a fake email address that takes you to a dodgy website where it asks you to enter, for instance, your Office 365 username and password. What they then do is once they've managed to get your details and can log into your account, they'll then log into your account and then send loads more spam emails to other people. And then it will keep going like that until they can get access to somebody's account, for instance, who works in the finance team. And then obviously it becomes a bit more of a monetary situation, and that's what they're trying to get access to. The next one is around sensitive information, which is pretty self-explanatory, and handling of large sums of money, which again is the finance team, which I've just given in that example. And then the last one is if your organisation operates in a country with advanced cyber capability or is hostile to the UK, again using, and I'm not picking on them, this is just the ones that are normally in the news. So for instance, China, I know has been in the news about hacking into organisations to steal their intellectual property, that if it's around a product, they then go and build that in their own country. Obviously, they don't have the research and design costs associated with that. So that's just a sort of a ballpark figure of what attacks we have. I think the majority of the ones that we get, that we see in our logs, etc., are indiscriminate attacks. We are seeing the education sector be more targeted. Previously, we didn't see that much, and it used to be larger businesses because they have they have far more money than in education. But now we're starting to see it a lot more. So we do have to try and follow all of the security measures that we put in place, and the best practices that we also put in place. Following on from that is a recent example. As I mentioned earlier, I won't mention the Multi Academy Trust name, but they are based around London. They have got 58 schools, which I think about 25 of them are primary schools, and then they've got a mixture of secondaries and SEND schools as well. I've actually been talking to their director of IT about this and getting some insight as to what happened, what protections they didn't have place, what protections they've now got in place, and sort of the learning from around that. And I won't go into it in too much detail, but the attack took place on a Friday evening, and we're finding that most attacks are taking place then because the IT staff aren't there for the weekend. So if they are able to gain access to your networks, then effectively they've got the weekend before anyone's going to be alerted to that. From the entry point for their attack was from a teaching assistant who had logged into their email on a home computer, or what they thought was going to be their email, but it was actually a phishing website. The hackers took that, they sent out loads more emails, basically a standard phishing attack that I spoke about earlier. And eventually it got to somebody with admin privileges, and they did the same thing. And what that meant was that they all of a sudden had access to all of their sites, all of their schools. So all 58 of their schools were joined together, and then they installed ransomware and encrypted all of their data so the school couldn't access it. It took down all of their services, and the hackers effectively had the key to unlock all of that data and those services. So it meant that the schools were going back on a Monday morning with no IT. So that's no MIS system, so no, for instance, ScholarPack, to be able to access all of those important records, safeguarding records, etc. And obviously it was a huge issue for them. The hackers actually gave a ransom demand. In education, we aren't allowed to pay ransoms. It's a part of the funding agreements from the DFE, but they demanded that the Multi Academy Trust paid £3 million, but that would rise to £6 million if they didn't pay within 10 days. So we're looking at a large sum of money here. I know we don't really talk about turnover in education, but this MAT was sort of turning over £280 million a year, and it was the ransom demands from them. Effectively, they couldn't pay them even if they wanted to. And then to recover from all of this, they had to reinstall every single server across all 58 sites. They had to reinstall. Unfortunately, they had backups that they could restore from, but it took them over 3 months to recover, and it's cost the organisation £750,000 to recover from that. So when we talk about cybersecurity, the reason why we are so passionate about it and are so sort of pushing it forward, and I know some of it can be a little bit restrictive, but there is good reason for it, and I think this example really sums up that reason for why we do it. So just moving on to some tips about data security and sort of who's responsible, and I've alluded to this earlier about who is responsible for keeping data safe, and the answer to that is all of us. We all have our part to play. Our networks, our data is on a secure bubble, but if any of us allow a hacker into that bubble, then they've effectively got free reign. So that's why we all play our part. So that's why we must follow any guidance that we put out as well. This one about locking your device, it's a very common one, and again, I spoke earlier that we've never really had anyone malicious staff member trying to look at data that they're not needing, but it's always good practice to use and the image there is showing which keys to press is the Windows key and the L key when you when you walk away from your device, and all that does is it just locks your screen. So if you have a privileged account with access to data that somebody else may not have, that's why it's important that you do that. Looking at GDPR, obviously that's our data protection and how we look after data and what we do, and if there's breaches, how to report it. I know a lot of the work, or sorry, a lot of the training was in the Flick modules, but also just make sure that you're aware of who your local DPO is, your data protection officer is in your school. It's normally the office manager, but if you are unsure on data protection, and just go and have a chat with them, just to make sure that you're up to speed with everything. And from a technical point of as well, if you are unsure about anything technically when it comes to data security, just talk to your technicians, or submit a ticket to the help desk system. We're here, we'll always help advise. As I say, we all have our part to play in data security and making sure that we're protected. So if you are unsure about it, just don't worry, just ask the question. No question is silly. That it's sort of changing every day, so it's important that we're all up to speed and understand what our protections are and how we can make sure that they're adhered to as well. And this is about USB storage devices. So this is, I know historically schools and staff have used an awful lot of USB storage devices to store the data on. 2 years ago, we said, look, we're not going to be using unencrypted ones anymore because it presents a massive data security risk for us, both from a hacking point of view, but also from a data protection point of view. If they were lost, anyone can just pick them up and read the data on there. And then last year, in this annual, it was the same annual webinar on cybersecurity, we sort of said, look, we're now moving away from any sort of USB storage device. And I just wanted to sort of reaffirm that in the organization, we shouldn't be using any USB storage devices, USB hard drive, USB stick, or whatever you want to call them. And our main reasons for this is, again, they break quite easily. I know we've had numerous teachers come to us asking, look, I've got all my data on here, it's broken, please can you help me? Unfortunately, if it's a hardware issue, 9 times out of 10 we can't do anything and the data's lost. Another reason is that the sticks can be plugged into any laptop device. We don't know what's on those devices. If it's a home laptop, if there's a virus on there, it could transfer to the USB stick, and then all of a sudden it's plugged into a work device or a school device, and that transfers over. So that is a massive security issue for us. One of the ways, or what we're advising everybody to do, is migrating over to OneDrive. So OneDrive, everybody has an account, an Office 365 account. OneDrive, you get 1 terabyte of space that you can access anywhere from a browser, or you can sync locally to your laptop. Now, if you are using a USB stick at the moment, that's fine. Just talk to your technician if you're unsure on how to move to OneDrive, and they'll help you get it sorted and migrated. But just to reaffirm that we shouldn't be using any form of USB storage devices. The only time that you may see that is for technicians when we are installing laptops. We can't install laptops. The majority of them don't come with CD drives anymore, so we have to use USB sticks, but there is no data on them. So that's the only time that you should ever see USB sticks in the organization. And then just moving on to passwords. Oh, sorry. So just some quick tips on passwords. Strong passwords and not repeated. Please ensure that you're not using something like Teacher1, and make sure it is a secure password, and that you're not using the same password across multiple devices, which I'll come on to why in a moment. Setting a strong password. So it doesn't have to be a really complicated password for it to be a strong password. So just this example here, big green tree, 3 random words hyphenated between and some random numbers on the end. It's quite a lengthy password. It's nothing that's personalized to you, because that's another thing. Anyone can go on to social media sites and look at, for instance, what your dog's name might be or something like that. And so make sure the passwords you set aren't personal to you and they're just randomized, and that's the best way to do it. Do not let anybody know your passwords. Obviously, don't share your passwords. Your account is for you. Everything across the organization from a security point of view is audited. So if somebody is using your account from an audit point of view, they are appearing as you. So please don't share your passwords or your accounts with anybody. Storing your passwords. This is one, bearing in mind we work in the technical services team, so we have lots and lots of passwords. I can't remember them all. Obviously, I don't have them all the same. So I use some password manager called MPass. And what that does is that allows us to securely store those passwords in there. And then I've got a library of all the passwords that I've got. And what I can then do is literally copy that password out, and if I'm logging into a website, I literally just paste it into the website. So I don't even have to type the passwords, I can just copy and paste. And then lastly, multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. They are the same thing, they're just for some unknown reason got two different names. So majority of your accounts will have this enabled already. So when you log in from home, for instance, to Office 365, you'll get a text message or authenticator app code to tell you to enter that sort of third stage. So you'll have your normal username and password, and then you'll have the code to enter as well. We do disable this for trusted locations. So if you're accessing it from within a school, you shouldn't be getting the prompt for that MFA code. You should just be able to go straight in with your username and password. And why a multi-factor authentication is really, really useful and vital for us. And just to note that in the previous example that I gave, the Multi Academy Trust didn't have multi-factor authentication set up, and that was one of their recommendations from the National Security Centre to make sure that they do quite quickly. And the reason for this is if I was to steal somebody's username and password with multi-factor authentication, I still couldn't log into their account because it would have sent them a text message with that code that I don't have access to. It works exactly the same as your internet banking, and it really does increase our security. So a lot of what I'm talking about today actually is applicable to your home accounts as well as your work accounts. So I would seriously recommend getting MFA set up on all of your accounts that you can do. And this is just a website. So if you have set up or signed up to various online websites, and any of those websites have been in a breach, you can actually type your email address into this website and it will give you a it'll effectively tell you if your username and password was in any of those breaches. Now this example here, this website, is the reason why you shouldn't have the same username and password for all of these different sites, because if one of them is breached and that username and password is leaked, that means automatically they can try all of these different services to see if you've got an account there. And of course, if you have and you're using the same username and password, they can get straight in as well. And because they're entering the username and password correctly, there'll be no warning to you that someone else is accessing your account. So that's why it's vital that you have separate usernames and passwords. Just some brief content on phishing attacks. So as I said earlier, this is what we see most in our trust. We do have what are called spam filters that try to filter it out, but again, the service is set up and managed by Microsoft, and they will alter it one way and then the hackers will send out a phishing email that does it a different way. So it is a constant battle between trying to filter out all of these phishing attacks that get sent through. And the other issue is the more we lock down the filtering, the less legitimate emails will get sent through. And what happens is we end up blocking legitimate emails and you don't receive them. So a phishing attack, I've spoken about this earlier as well. It's an email that's sent out to a user that pretends to be a legitimate email, and it's not. It tries to get you to go to a website to enter your username and password. So some of the things to look out for is, and these are general ones. Each one of these doesn't necessarily is in each email, but they are just general ones to look out for. So urgency or authority. So if they're saying, oh, you need to act now, you need to do this now, generally speaking, it's trying to get you to act on an impulse and click on the link and enter your details. Poor spelling or grammar. A lot of the attacks that we see are not from the UK or English speaking countries, so we tend to see quite a lot of spelling or grammar mistakes. Links to unfamiliar websites as well. Before clicking on a link, you can actually hover over it and it will tell you the actual address of the link. So if you look at the link and it looks a bit of a dodgy link, or you're not too sure about it, then it could well be a phishing attack. And also, if you get an unexpected email from someone within the trust, you can actually spoof an email. So I could send an email, say from, for instance, Paul Stone, but he knows nothing about it. So if you do receive an email, and just be inquisitive about the content of it, and it's like, do you really want me to do that, or whatever it's asking you to do. If you're unsure, just give them a quick call, and that's the best way. So how do we increase our protection against phishing attacks? So user awareness, again, looking at what we've just gone through, but also reporting. So we actually have set up an email address that's been running for the last 6 months called Teletech, which came out of the GDPR working group. And effectively, if you have an email and you think, I'm not too sure if this is legitimate or not, just forward it to that email address. And what we'll do is we'll go through the email and we'll reply back with you saying whether it's legitimate or not, but also giving you some pointers on why it's not legitimate, and what we've checked to actually come to that conclusion. And then finally, MFA, which we've just gone through.